The House will also vote on a bill to block EPA regulation of greenhouse gases. Similar provisions failed yesterday in the U.S. Senate. You can see live House coverage on C-SPAN and now live Senate coverage here on C-SPAN 2.
To order, today's opening prayer will be offered by Reverend Dr. Jeffrey W. Carter, Senior Pastor of the Manassas Church of the Brethren in Manassas, Virginia.
Will you pray with me? Gracious God, from whom all blessings do flow, we give thanks for the opportunity of this new day and the power and possibility within it to do what is noble, trustworthy, and true. We pause to center ourselves upon the importance of this present moment, upon our calling. May your spirit of wisdom and discernment descend upon this body as they seek to govern with justice and care. Grant them wisdom and courage as they meet the challenges of our time, knowing they are stewards of a democracy and servants of a people. May their decisions answer your eternal call to guard the dignity of each person, to ensure freedom for all people, and to strive tirelessly for the common good. For it is in our living beyond ourselves that we find the greatest meaning and deepest expression of our faith. Truly, on this day, may your grace be upon this Senate, our senators, their staffs, those who work tirelessly in support of this chamber, as well as their families. And may your grace be upon our nation, diverse, gifted, and united in our affirmation of life and liberty, happiness and peace. For this we pray. Amen.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., April 7, 2011. To the Senate. Under provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Tom Udall, a senator from the state of New Mexico, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President Pro Tempore.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader is recognized.
Following any leader remarks, the Senate will be in morning business with the first hour equally divided, with the Republicans controlling the first 30 minutes, the majority controlling the second 30 minutes. Senator Hooven will be recognized at noon for up to 25 minutes to deliver his maiden speech to the Senate. We continue to work to complete action on the budget business bill, the small business bill. We're hopeful we'll be able to vote on the budget by the end of this week. Senators will be notified when votes are scheduled. Mr. President, for members of my caucus, the 12:30 luncheon that we have every Thursday has been postponed till 3 o'clock today. Mr. President, approximately 11 hours ago, I was at the White House with Speaker Boehner, and we made a joint statement to the press in the nighttime there at the White House. At that time, I was cautiously optimistic that we could complete the work on the people's business to fund the government to the end of this fiscal year, October 1st. Now, Mr. President, we're 38 hours away from this deadline of the government shutting down. So it's clear from the math that we're less than 2 days. In less than 2 days, a decision must be made as to whether the government closes or stays open. Whether we put the American people first and reach an agreement, or have, as I will explain in a few minutes, issues having nothing to do with government funding cause the government to shut down. We met last night, the Speaker and I, with the President for quite a long time, hour and a half or 2 hours. The meeting was initially one with the President, Vice President, Speaker Boehner, and myself were present to try to work through these issues. We then went into a meeting with our staffs to try to work through these issues. The numbers, Mr. President, are basically there. That's where we are. My staff, the President's staff, Speaker's staff worked through the night to try to come up with the appropriate way to end this impasse. And I repeat, Mr. President, the numbers are basically there. But I am not as nearly as optimistic, and that's an understatement, as I was 11 hours ago. The numbers are extremely close. Our differences are no longer over how much savings we get on government spending. The only thing holding up an agreement is ideology. I'm sorry to say, Mr. President, that my friend, the Speaker, and the Republican leadership have drawn a line in the sand, not dealing with the deficit that we know we have to deal with, that we've made significant cuts, not with the numbers that would fund the government to the end of this fiscal year. That's not the issue. The issue is ideology, not numbers. And there are a number of issues, but the two main issues that are holding this matter up are the choice of women, reproductive rights, and clean air. These matters have no place on a budget bill, Mr. President. This is a bill to keep the government running with dollars. They want to roll back the Clean Air Act. The bottom line is this. If we are going to sit down at the negotiating table, as we have, and fund the government, it should be based on government funding. I know there are some rambunctious new members of the House of Representatives over there, and there are probably some who have been there in a long time who are more senior, who are Republicans, and this is their time to shine. But do that in legislative manner. Don't do it on a spending bill. They can send us stuff. We'll get over here. We'll get to it when we can to show that we can get to things. We've done it on this Clean Air Bill, very difficult issues, dealing with 1099. That's government issues relating to the health care bill. It was tough. We did it. We had a bunch of votes yesterday on EPA funding. We can legislate, and we can do that on issues that are difficult. We showed that this week in the Senate. But no one can realistically think that we can walk out of a room and suddenly agree on a matter that's been around for we can't walk out of a room and focus on an issue that's been around for 4 decades. Issue relating to choice. This is a legislative matter. We can't solve in one night a disagreement this country has been fighting for 4 decades. There are very, very definite sides that have been taken. I served in the House of Representatives with Henry Hyde, where this all got started. Henry Hyde was the man that started, more than anyone else, the public debate on women's choice. He was dug in as to what he felt was right. Others disagreed with him. But the Hyde Amendment prevailed, and we've been basically working off that for 40, I'm sorry, I keep saying 40, it seems that 40, it's 4 decades, 40 years, Mr. President. We've been focused on that issue. We can't solve in one night a disagreement this country's been having for 4 decades. It's not realistic. It's not realistic to shut down the government on a debate dealing with abortion. It's not realistic. It's not fair to the American people. We haven't solved the issue in 40 years. We're not going to solve it in the next 38 hours. So now is the time to be realistic. We should not be distracted by ideology. We've been distracted by ideology. This is a bill that funds the government. It isn't a bill that should deal with changing the Environmental Protection Agency rules and regulations. That should be done legislatively. We can't now, on a bill focusing on the spending of this country, suddenly decide there's going to be a big breakthrough on one side or the other on abortion. It can't happen. It won't happen. Now, speaking of distractions, the House is now going to pass a short-term stopgap. It's a non-starter over here, Mr. President. Doing that is an assured way to close the government. There are no more short-term extensions unless it's a clean, continuing resolution to allow us a few more days to work on matters relating to funding the government. The President has told the Speaker that. I've told the Speaker that. Republicans in the Senate have told the Speaker that we can't pass another short-term CR. It's not only bad policy, it's a fantasy. As I said last night, this is a non-starter in the Senate. The President told the Speaker that last night. He called and talked to him 20 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago, told him the same thing. I talked to the President at 9:45. He told me the same thing. We have moved so far, Mr. President, and we have given everything that we can give. The President is absolutely right. We can't keep funding this government one paycheck to the next, one stopgap measure after another. The United States of America, this great country of ours, shouldn't have to live paycheck to paycheck. I repeat, Mr. President, this debate that's going on today deals with money. It doesn't deal with ideological issues that both sides have drawn a line in the sand. If the House of Representatives wants to send us matters regarding Wall Street reform, we can debate them here. If they want to send us measures dealing with health care, we can debate them here. If they want to send us issues dealing with EPA, we can debate them here just like we did yesterday. If they want to send us something here on Title X, which is reproductive health of women, we can debate that issue. But it's not on a stopgap funding measure. So if this government shuts down, and it looks like it's headed in that direction, it's going to be based on my friends in the House of Representatives, the leadership over there, focusing on ideological matters that have nothing to do with funding this government. That's a sad day, I think. As my friend, the Republican leader's predecessor said, the great Henry Clay, legislation, all legislation, he said, is based on mutual consent. The great compromiser, Henry Clay, who served in this body and served 3 separate times as Speaker of the House of Representatives, that's what he said. Isn't this the time? Isn't this the time to do that? Remember, the word that is so important in what Henry Clay said is mutual concession. And we have done far more than anyone ever thought we would do. We've done it because we believe that this government should not shut down.
Mr. President.
Republican leaders recognized.
My good friend mentioned Henry Clay. He would have approved very much of the bill that the House will be sending over later today. And the abortion provision that my good friend, the Majority Leader, refers to is one that Democratic leaders have previously supported, it's a measure that's been previously in appropriation bills, and a measure that's previously been signed by the President. So obviously that's not what this measure is about. As the Majority Leader indicated, the talks are continuing, but 2 positions that have emerged are very clear. Throughout this debate, Republicans have consistently said that we prefer a bipartisan agreement that keeps the government running and provides critical funding and certainty for our troops. This is exactly what we've been working toward all along, and that is exactly what the bill the House of Republicans are expected to pass today will do. Importantly, this bill will also include a modest reduction in Washington spending, a reduction well within the range that even Democratic leaders have described as reasonable. In fact, the bill that House Republicans will send over to the Senate today is nothing more than a smaller version of the larger bill that Democrats say they want. So let's be specific, very specific. The Obama administration and the Secretary of Defense have said they need an annual defense bill. The House bill we'll get today does that. It passes the defense appropriations bill. Senate Democrats have said they want the government to keep running. The House bill we'll get today does precisely that. Democratic leaders have identified a number of cuts they believe are reasonable. The spending cuts in the House bill that we'll get today go no farther than that. Democrat leaders have said they wanted no controversial policy riders. That's what we just heard our majority leader talking about. But the policy provisions in the bill we'll get today are provisions that members of the Democratic leadership have already voted for and that the President himself has previously signed into law. So it would be pretty hard to argue that that's controversial. So here's the bottom line. The bill does everything Democrats have previously said they want. It cuts Washington spending by an amount that Democratic leaders believe is reasonable. The policy prescriptions it contains have been previously agreed to by Democratic leaders and signed by this President. And most importantly, this is the only proposal out there that keeps the government open, the only one that's coming over from the House. In other words, if a shutdown does occur, our Democratic friends have no one to blame but themselves because they've done nothing whatsoever to prevent it. Since they have produced no alternative to the bill that the House is sending over today, no alternative to the one the House is sending over today, this is the only proposal currently on the table that will keep the government open. So there are two options at this point. Democrats can either take up and pass this reasonable bill that falls well within the bounds of what their own leadership has defined as acceptable, or shut down the government. That's it. That's the choice. So rather than talking about a shutdown, I hope our Democratic friends join us in actually preventing one. There's only one way to do that, by quickly passing the House bill and sending it to the President for his signature before tomorrow night. Now, Mr. President, on another matter, the President will meet today at the White House with Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos. We understand they'll announce an agreement to advance a long-awaited and overdue free trade agreement with this important trading partner and arguably our best ally in South America. Republicans have been urging the President to act on this and on other critical trade deals for over 2 years. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce estimates that trade deals with Colombia, Panama, and South Korea could provide up to 380,000 U.S. jobs. And we know that this deal alone would create tens of thousands of new jobs here in this country. At a time when millions of Americans are out of work and businesses are looking for opportunities to hire, there was no excuse to slow walk these deals. So we hope today's meeting marks a real step forward in concluding this trade agreement with Colombia. We expect this announcement means the President will be submitting all three trade agreements, all three, Korea, Colombia, and Panama, in the very near future, and we look forward to working with him to clear them through the Congress. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the first hour equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with Republicans controlling the first 30 minutes and the majority controlling the second.
Mr. President.
Senator from Kansas is recognized.
Mr. President, it was my understanding that I was granted 20 minutes under the leader's time. If that is the case, I would like assurance.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
I appreciate that, Mr. President. And I appreciate the leadership, as best they can, going into great detail on the mutual effort to avoid a government shutdown. I know all members are vitally interested in this, as is the American public. I do happen to agree, probably no surprise, with the Republican leader and his description of the situation, especially in regards to our national security, which I think is exceedingly important. I've asked for this time now to discuss a related subject. Some may think it is not related, but I do think it is. It is related to a government or an economic shutdown, if you will, on many businesses all throughout the country, already occurring, something that we hear about from time to time from various industries or businesses or occupations, almost everybody up and down Main Street. And I would describe it as a shutdown by regulation or almost strangulation by regulation. And that is what I would like to talk about just a moment. And so I come to the floor to highlight another area where regulation is having a negative effect on business in my state and all across the country. Now, to date, I have spoken about the impact on regulations on health care and on agriculture and on energy. And today, I'm here to talk about the regulation of our financial sector. I want to emphasize I'm talking about the impact of regulation on our community banks, those banks in each of our towns that are often home-owned and operated. Our community banks share the common concern that I've heard from businesses in all industries all across my state. The volume and pace of regulations that are coming out of Washington are basically unimaginable, and they add to the costs, and they are diverting resources that would otherwise be used to grow their businesses or serve the customers or help the economy in its recovery. As I have noted in previous remarks, I was very encouraged that President Obama signed an executive order, and I credit him for that. He directed the administration to review, to modify, to streamline, expand, or repeal those significant regulatory actions that he called duplicative, unnecessary, overly burdensome, or would have had significant economic impact on Americans. He even, in an offhand remark, said some of these regulations are actually stupid. And I agree with the President, and I gave him credit for that. And I was originally encouraged by the President's commitment to a new regulatory strategy, which seems to be across the board in almost everything we do. But after reviewing the executive order, I was left with some concerns. And here's why. The executive order states, in applying these principles, each agency is directed to use the best available techniques to quantify anticipated present and future benefits and costs as accurately as possible. Now, nobody could possibly disagree with that. It's a good statement. Where appropriate and permitted by law, however, each agency may consider and discuss qualitatively. I'm not sure if I understand that in very clear language, but at least I've been trying to figure that out along with a lot of the people who are on the receiving end of regulations. And then this is the part where I defy anybody to comprehend. When considering these regulations, we must consider values that are difficult or impossible to quantify, including equity, human dignity, fairness, and distributive impacts. Now, as the Wall Street Journal captured in their response to the President's editorial, quote, these amorphous concepts are not measurable at all. How on earth do you make such a determination? This language is, in fact, if anybody could understand it, a very large loophole, coupled with an exception for the independent agencies, such as the FDIC and the EPA and the sub-agencies and other regulatory agencies. It has the potential to result in no changes at all. So here you have an executive order, but you also have an executive order that has a lot of loopholes in it. That is why I have introduced legislation to put teeth into this executive order. My bill is called the Regulatory Responsibility for Our Economy Act, and it strengthens and codifies the President's order. Like the executive order, my legislation ensures that the regulators review, modify, streamline, expand, or repeal regulatory actions that are duplicative, unnecessary, overly burdensome, or would have significant economic impacts on Americans. But it requires that federal regulations put forth do consider the economic burden on the American businesses, ensure stakeholder input during the regulatory process, and promote innovation. Now, to date, 47 members of this body have signed on as co-sponsors. I personally invite the distinguished acting presiding officer to also sign on as a co-sponsor if he so chooses. That is a testament to the concerns that my colleagues are hearing from their constituents about how the unrelenting tide of regulations now coming from Washington are harming their businesses and our economy. It could be described, actually, as another government shutdown, as I've indicated, by strangulation. So today I want to call attention to the impact of the regulations on the financial services sector, in particular the impact on our community banks. I might add, in discussing this before on agriculture, energy, and health care, we talked to the stakeholders involved in Kansas, the people who are actually involved. It is their suggestions that I am repeating and that I have tried to encompass in my legislation. The financial services sector of our economy is already the focus of substantial regulation. I think everybody understands that. We all support common sense financial regulations. However, it is important that financial regulations do not become undue burdens, especially on our banks that are the backbone of Main Street and finance the economic growth in our communities. Now, while I appreciate that many of the agencies with responsibility for regulating the industry are independent of the executive branch, I am hopeful that these agencies are receptive to the President's effort. While the economic crisis focused attention on the financial services industry, leading to the passage of the Dodd-Frank bill, our nation's community banks, who were already shouldering an undue regulatory burden, will now bear a greater burden when the hundreds of regulations from this law are implemented. I should probably say thousands. Our nation's community banks are small businesses. On average, a community bank has 37 employees and approximately $154 million in loans and other assets. The majority of banks in Kansas have an average of less than 14 employees. However, they currently comply with 1,700 pages of consumer regulations alone. That's incredible. They must also comply with hundreds of additional pages of regulations regarding lending practices and other banking operations. Now, according to a summary of the Dodd-Frank Act, this legislation mandates that 11 different agencies now create at least 243 more regulations, issue 67 one-time reports or studies, and 22 new periodic reports. Many of these new rules are required to be issued in the next year or two, and financial regulatory agencies have the discretion to issue additional rules on top of those, and those required under Dodd-Frank. This is incredible, if not unbelievable. Regulators have already issued more than 1,400 pages of regulatory proposals. Up to 5,000 pages of regulations are expected. Many will be proposed by a new bureaucracy that is created in the Dodd-Frank Act, the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection. Remember that name. The acronym is CFPB. SUFPUB, I guess, is the name that you would call it. And SUFPUB will doubtlessly suffocate a lot of businesses. It will have broad authority to monitor, regulate, and direct the activity of banks. These actions will create additional and significant compliance costs that will impact the ability of every bank to serve its community. These actions have real costs to banks. According to recent testimony before the House Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee, the CBO Director, the Congressional Budget Office Director, Douglas Elmendorf, said the Dodd-Frank Act is expected to impose nearly $27 billion in new private sector fees, assessments, and premiums. This amount includes more than $14 billion in new fees on banks. And guess where that money is going to end up in regards to consumer costs? Now, our community bankers and their customers are worried about the impact of these new requirements. That's got to be the understatement of my remarks. They are frustrated, they are angry, they are upset. Now, not every regulation will apply to the community banks. They tell me the rapid pace and volume of new regulations being put forth are placing a strain on any bank's compliance capabilities and are adding significantly to their operating costs. Many banks tell me they are reevaluating whether they can afford to offer some products and services such as mortgage lending. Yep, you got that right. If you live in a small community and you go to your local bank and you'd like to get a loan in regards to finance and mortgaging, sorry, they're out of the business. It is important to understand that banks do not oppose common sense regulations. That's not what I'm saying. They are necessary to ensure that banks are doing their jobs and that consumers receive the proper information and disclosures that are beneficial to them. The problem is that unlike bigger financial institutions, our community banks do not have a large staff of attorneys or compliance officers to help them navigate wave after wave of these new regulations. By one estimate, for the typical small bank, more than 1 out of every $4, 1 out of 4 of operating expenses is used to pay for the cost of complying with government regulation. And with Dodd-Frank, we can only expect that cost to go higher. One community banker tells me that they have 5 compliance officers out of a staff of less than 100 employees. In speaking with compliance officers, they tell me that regulations that are being put forth to implement a range of new requirements are being written too quickly without specifics and guidance for banks to implement as intended. They point to regulations that are duplicative or contradictory, but which they must comply with, even if the banker or the consumer does not view the regulation as having any value or benefit to the consumer. I might add, even if they can understand it. Such compliance efforts cost time and money, and it is vital that federal regulators consider the total impact of all regulations, not merely each regulation in each isolation, and work to reduce unnecessary regulatory burdens on an already heavy regulated industry. Now, with these concerns in mind, I would like to call attention to several regulations that highlight the impact of an overly burdensome regulatory environment. I encourage regulators to join the President's effort to pursue solutions to regulations that make it difficult for our community banks to serve their customers, support businesses in their communities, and help grow our economy. The Dodd-Frank Act requires the Federal Reserve to issue a rule for debit interchange fees. Basically, interchange fees or swipe fees are fees that a merchant bank pays to a customer's bank when the customer uses their debit card. In December, I joined a bipartisan group of senators in writing to Federal Reserve Board Chairman Ben Bernanke, expressing our concerns with the interchange provision and to encourage the Federal Reserve to ensure that our consumer interests are protected in rate standards that are set. Our letter outlines, quote, concerns with the consequences of replacing a market-based system for debit card acceptance with a government-controlled system, as well as concerns that the provision will make small bank and credit union debit cards more expensive for merchants to accept than those cards issued by larger banks, and would likely put them at a disadvantage compared to the large banks that issue those other cards. In addition, the rule does not consider all of the costs incurred by a bank in actually providing the service, such as all the costs for fraud control, prevention, network processing fees, card production and issuance costs, fixed costs including capital investments. These are all significant costs for many banks and will be one of the factors they will have to look at when considering whether they even continue to offer any debit card service. Now, during debate on the debit interchange amendment, supporters presented it as a pro-consumer provision, maintaining that the reduction in interchange fees would be passed on to the consumer. Yet there's nothing in the Dodd-Frank Act that requires retailers to pass on any savings from debit interchange fees to their customers. On the contrary, the debit interchange rule will likely result in higher bank fees, a loss of reward programs, or banks may ultimately, as I have said, decide not to offer debit cards to their customers. Some are already doing that. Some steps are already being considered. Higher fees or limited choices as a result of such government price controls does not benefit any consumer. That's why legislation I am supporting calls for the Federal Reserve and other federal financial regulators slow down, fully study this issue, carefully evaluate the 11,000 comments that were received on this proposed rule. I am particularly concerned about the estimated cost of the debit interchange rule for our community banks, which is not insignificant. Now, supporters of the interchange rule say that our community banks will not be impacted. Well, I beg to differ. Now, consider what I'm hearing from the community banks in my state of Kansas. One community banker in a town of just 1,000, whose bank began offering debit cards a few years ago, tells me the cost of the interchange proposal will cost his bank $19,000 a year. Two other banks that serve multiple rural communities will see increased costs per year of more than $46,000 and $100,000, respectively. Other banks, including banks in my state, estimate the cost to be in the millions. Ultimately, loss of income for banks will mean less capital available to lend to borrowers. Now, I also want to mention the concerns I'm hearing about the patchwork of mortgage disclosure requirements. Taken together, existing regulations and anticipated regulations as a result of Dodd-Frank may well have the effect of making it more difficult and costly to provide mortgage loans to qualified borrowers, reduce lending capacity, and may push, already pushing, some lenders to simply stop offering mortgages. One example is the SAFE Act. It creates a nationwide mortgaging licensing system and registry for mortgage loan originators. Now, this registry is intended for use by regulators to identify mortgage brokers or lenders who seek to work in a state after being banned from working in a different state. That sounds all right. However, each mortgage loan originator will be required, banned or not, will be required to register with the National Registry, obtain a unique identification number, and submit fingerprints for the FBI to conduct a criminal background check. So if you're in the business of trying to be a mortgage loan originator, you're going to get fingerprinted. You're going to be on file with the FBI. Our community bankers tell me their cost to meet the new requirements, if anybody would ever want to step up to this, is roughly $1,000 to $2,000 per loan officer. I know that might not seem like a lot of money to Washington regulators, but it is a tidy sum in rural America. The cost of compliance will take time and money away from the business of lending and may ultimately be passed on to the consumer in the form of higher prices for a mortgage loan. That's what will happen. Finally, I want to mention the recent guidance on the overdraft payment programs put forth by the FDIC. Now, at some point, most of us have had experience with overdraft programs, perhaps when we forgot to balance our checkbook. In the guidance, the FDIC stated, quote, "The guidance focuses on automated overdraft programs and encourages banks to offer less costly alternatives. If, for example, a borrower overdraws his or her account on more than 6 occasions where a fee is charged in a rolling 12-month period. Additionally, to avoid reputational and other risks, the FDIC expects institutions to institute appropriate daily limits on customer costs and ensure that transactions are not processed in a manner designed to maximize the cost to consumers." So while banks offer overdraft protection programs now and take other steps to aid customers in avoiding overdrafts, many are concerned that this guidance put forth by the FDIC is overly prescriptive, nice word for it, imposes new regulations, and goes farther than amendments on overdraft put forth by the Federal Reserve. Further, banks note that the guidance seems to contradict the intent of the President's executive order that requires agencies to propose or adopt regulations only upon a reasoned determination that its benefits justify its cost, recognizing that some benefits and costs are difficult to quantify. Banks are concerned that the FDIC guidance is based on outdated information and that the impact of the Federal Reserve's rules on overdraft programs should be reviewed before moving forward with additional guidance in this area. So while the FDIC is not subject to the executive order, I certainly hope that they would adopt the spirit of the order. In addition, when a customer has a pattern of excessive use of automated overdraft programs, the FDIC states that banks should contact their customers about a more appropriate and lower-cost alternative that better suits their needs. You know, I can remember a bank scandal back in the House of Representatives. If only that bank would have had this protection from FDIC, none of that scandal would have ever happened. This is ridiculous. The FDIC recently provided additional clarification on this guidance that provides some flexibility about how banks reach out to customers and permits them to contact customers by mail as well as in person and by telephone. However, the requirement that banks contact customers who incur 6 overdrafts in a rolling 12-month period remains a broad overreach of the FDIC's authority, putting the burden on banks rather than the customer, who ultimately bears the responsibility for ensuring that they have sufficient funds in their account to cover their transactions. In fact, one study shows that 77% of customers paid no overdraft fees in the previous 12 months. That same study also showed that for those 21% of customers who paid an overdraft fee, 69% say they were glad that the payment was covered. Another survey found that 94% of those surveys said they would want a transaction to be covered by their bank, even if it resulted in an overdraft fee. This guidance seems to be a clear example of where an agency is overreaching with little evidence of the need for or effectiveness of such additional guidance. Mr. President, in closing, I thank again the President, I'm talking about President Obama, for taking a step in the right direction to review federal regulations that place undue burdens on our nation's economic growth and recovery. I hope that financial regulators will join in this effort to examine rules and regulations that pose significant barriers to our small community banks and their ability to serve their customers and contribute to the growth of their communities. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Kaka.
President.
Tennessee is recognized.
Ask consent to vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection, so ordered.
Ask consent to speak for up to 15 minutes.
The minority time is only 1 minute and 30 seconds at this point, and then the majority time is for 30 minutes.
Oh, I see.
Tennessee may proceed.
I thank the chair, and if another senator comes and wishes to speak, I'll be succinct. Senator Begich, I see, is coming, and so I'll try to do mine in less period of time. I thank the chair for its courtesy. Two subjects, Mr. President. First, it's a good deal of discussion in Washington today about making sure that we continue to operate the government over the weekend and on into next week while we get about the important business of reducing our debt. Our national debt is an urgent problem. Members on both sides of the aisle understand this and have said this. We have 64 senators who've written the President to say, Mr. President, we're ready to go to work on reducing the debt on the whole budget. We have a proposal from Congressman Ryan. We have a proposal from the Erskine-Bowles Commission. We're ready to go to work. And the House of Representatives has made a proposal to, for the time being, continue the government while we work on that is eminently reasonable. And I would like to ask unanimous consent to include a Wall Street Journal op-ed from April 4th by Gary Becker, George Shultz, and John B. Taylor that points out that the numbers in the House of Representatives proposal would have the federal government spend for the rest of the year basically what we spent in 2008 plus an allowance for inflation. And there's no reason, the authors say, why the government agencies from Treasury and Commerce to the Executive Office of the President can't get by with the same amount of funding that they spent in 2008 plus increases for inflation. So this would be a reasonable first step as we get to the larger issue of how we reduce the debt over a longer period of time. I ask consent to include that in the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, last month marked the one-year anniversary of President Obama signing the health care bill into law. I believe it was an historic mistake. And we talk about the health care law in a variety of ways. One thing that we have said is that at a time when our country needs to try to make it easier and cheaper to create private sector jobs, the health care law makes it harder and more expensive to create private sector jobs. And someone might say, well, how could that happen? And so this morning I'd like to just mention a few examples of how it actually is happening, how the health care law actually is making it harder and more expensive to create private sector jobs. Last September, I met with about 35 chief executive officers of chain restaurant companies. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the retail and hospitality industries in America are the largest employees in the United States, second only to the U.S. government. Food services and drink places provide roughly 10 million jobs. Most of these are first-time job seekers and low-income employees, young people and poor people. So we're talking about companies that provide a huge number of jobs to low-income Americans. One of the chief executive officers that I met with said his company had been operating their stores with 90 employees on the average, and as a result of the health care law, their goal was to operate with 70 employees. Mr. President, that's fewer jobs, and there are many other examples of that around the room. Many of the members are on the National Council of Chain Restaurants. They have significant concerns about the law, and they provided me with specific examples. One restaurant chain based in Tennessee with worries about the law is a company called Ruby Tuesday. Ruby Tuesday has 24,000 full-time employees, 16,000 part-time employees. According to Ruby Tuesday, the employer mandate will cost them roughly $47 million, yet their annual net income last year was just over $45 million. In other words, the cost of the health care law to them equals the entire profits of this multi-billion-dollar company. Ruby Tuesday says as a result, it will have to reduce its workforce by 18% in order to hold its profits even. And the company will increase the hours for their full-time employees and reduce their overall workforce in order to reduce the number of people for which coverage would be required. Now, the problem we're talking about, Mr. President, is that the new law requires employers who don't provide, quote, acceptable coverage to pay a fair share, quote, penalty of $2,000 per full-time employee. And a full-time employee is defined as someone who works 30 hours a week instead of 40 hours a week. So you can see that a company like Ruby Tuesday with that many employees would have a big cost, $47 million, which equaled its entire profits for the year. Another restaurant chain, White Castle, is also concerned. It said that according to their internal estimates, the health care law's provision imposing penalties for employer-sponsored health plans whose cost to the employee exceeds 9.5% of that employee's household income would be particularly punishing. In its present form, the provision alone would lead to an approximate increased cost over 55% of what White Castle currently earns in net income. This devastating impact would cut future expansion and job creation by at least half, and the impact would be predominantly felt in low-income areas where jobs are most needed. A representative of the National Retail Federation testified in February about another large quick-change restaurant about potential job loss. This company preferred to remain anonymous, but the chain estimates that the incremental cost to comply with the new law is $10,000 to $15,000 annually per affected restaurant, which across the entire system could be $50 to $75 million a year. And in that company, this would wipe out one-third of that system's profits for the years, which means eliminating 10% of its stores, which means hundreds of restaurants, and the potential elimination of 12,500 jobs. There was another example of a large franchise system with multiple casual dining restaurant concepts and projects. They estimated the average cost per restaurant in their system of the new health care law would be $237,000, which equates to a system-wide cost of providing health insurance benefits to full-time employees of almost $806 million a year. If all this changed small business franchisee owners elected to pay the employer's penalty instead of providing insurance, the cost would be reduced, but to just over still $84,000 a restaurant, or a savings of $286 million system-wide. So to cope with the increased costs of the health care law, Mr. President, the employers who are restaurant owners, and these are the largest employers in America, employ the most people in America except for the U.S. government, are seeing their costs go up, and as a result of that, there are fewer jobs for Americans. Republicans believe it would be better to reduce health care costs step by step so more people can afford to buy insurance, instead of expanding a system that costs too much, and will continue to advocate that position. But the important thing to remember about the law, we've heard it said, well, it hurts Medicare, it adds regulations, raises taxes, individual premiums are going up, but also it makes it harder and more difficult and more expensive to create private sector jobs at a time when our country should be dedicated to making it easier and cheaper to create private sector jobs. I thank the President, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Alaska is recognized.
Mr. President, I rise today to speak about the Wyden-Coates-Begich Bipartisan Tax Fairness and Simplification Act. Mr. President, it's that time of the year again, tax time. Across our nation, small businesses and families are struggling to unravel the annual nightmare of paperwork required to file their taxes. Across our nation, small businesses and families are struggling. Mr. President, my wife and I are small business owners, so I especially understand how burdensome and expensive the tax code is, and filling out the process can be for folks this time of year. This process is costly and burdensome. The IRS estimates that Americans spend 6.1 billion hours each year filling out tax forms, and roughly $163 billion each year on tax compliance. Small businesses are the engine and the backbone of our still recovering economy. So we should allow them to spend more time doing what they do best, creating jobs, growing the economy, not filling out burdensome paperwork. This is why I've joined my colleagues from both sides of the aisle, Senators Wyden and Senator Coates, to introduce the Bipartisan Tax Fairness and Simplification Act. Tax reform has been a long priority of mine. I'm happy to be moving forward on this important piece of legislation today. In a nutshell, our legislation simplifies the tax code and alleviates many of the burdensome paperwork and costly requirements that are bogging down American families and businesses. Our legislation would allow most taxpayers to file their taxes using a straightforward and shortened one-page 1040 IRS form. When you look at this example here, this is exactly what it would look like. Also, individuals and families will be able to request that the IRS prepare a tax return for them to review, modify, and sign. The Wyden-Coates-Begich reduces the number of tax brackets for individuals from 6 to 3. 15%, 25%, 35%, and eliminates the alternative minimum tax, which forces millions of taxpayers to calculate their taxes twice and pay the higher amount. In order to make capital investments more cost-effective for small business owners, the Wyden-Coates-Begich bill will allow 95% of small businesses, those with gross receipts of up to $1 million, to expense all equipment and inventory costs in a single year. These changes may be seem simple and common sense, but they make a world of difference. Let's talk specifically about the small businesses for a second. The people who are keeping our economy going, like my friend John Brower from Anchorage. John owns and operates Alaska Laser Printing in Anchorage. Mr. President, John works tirelessly, 365 days a year, and is proud of the business he built. When new technology is developing in the printing business, it's always bringing on needs for new equipment. This legislation will be able to have him and allow him to expense all that equipment costs. That would make and truly would make a world of difference for John and save him thousands and thousands of dollars in taxes. I'm here to speak for the John Browers and the other small businesses all across Alaska and across this country. My view is very simple. Let's quit giving tax breaks to multi-million-dollar corporations. Let's close the corporate loopholes and help out the small businesses like John Browers. Mr. President, right now we are facing a $14.3 trillion deficit. We are hours away from a potential government shutdown rather than continuing on a path toward long-term economic recovery. Our new bill actually promotes economic growth because it allows businesses to spend more time growing and less time worrying about the overly burdensome tax system, which we all know only enables tax avoidance. As all of us around here know, tax avoidance means outsourcing jobs overseas. Instead of our legislation, it is in incentives and enables companies to invest right here in America, rather than incentivizing them to invest overseas. The legislation also promotes responsible retirement savings and investment by expanding tax-free saving opportunities. The American Dream Account. Whether it is for a new home, education for your children, or health care, this account provides a unique opportunity to invest in the American dream. Families and individuals alike can make contributions to an account that functions much like the Retirement Savings Account, an RSA, to work towards purchasing their American dream. Mr. President, right now the U.S. corporate income tax rate is the second highest in the world. That puts American corporations at a competitive disadvantage globally. To resolve that, the Wyden-Coates-Begich legislation cuts the top corporate rate from 35% to 24%. That means American corporations will pay more competitive rate than corporations based in trading partner countries such as Canada, Germany, and France. To make the tax code fair and reduce opportunities for individuals and businesses to avoid paying their fair share of taxes, Wyden-Coates-Begich bill ends a number of specialized tax breaks that favor one business sector or some special interest that's been fortunate to be down here lobbying years past and getting their special deal, and make sure everyone is treated fairly, but ensures that we are competitive in the global economy that we now compete in. Our legislation protects and extends important tax deductions for families. The Wyden-Coates-Begich bill retains many of the most commonly claimed individual tax credits and deductions, including deductions for mortgage interest and charitable contributions, credits for children and earned income, and preferences for the armed forces, veterans, and elderly, and the disabled will be retained, as will those that help Americans pay for health care and higher education and save for retirement. The Wyden-Coates-Begich bill also permanently extends the enhancement of the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit and the dependent care credit. The legislation eliminates the current law phase-out of itemized deductions and personal exemptions, allowing all taxpayers to benefit fully from their deductions and exemptions. Finally, our legislation requires banks to identify all individuals who benefit from foreign accounts by name and nationality, and to withhold 30% of all passive income, such as interest and capital gains, sent to any individual who disguises his or her identity. Mr. President, tax reform is a bipartisan issue. Hands down, Republicans, Democrats, our President, the OMB Director, and many others all across this country have called for it. So let's do it. Let's stop punching holes in the outdated system and make real tax reform happen. Tax reform is about creating jobs, growing the economy, and supporting our families and businesses for the future. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
The Assistant Majority Leader's recognized.